Great.
All right, I'm going in. All right, welcome. Welcome to the first episode of an exciting new show that I am very excited to be a part of here. We're calling it Community Capital Live. This is the twice a month live show where we talk about the emerging markets of local and impact investing. I am very grateful to be flanked by our two resident experts here in both Michael Schumann and Kevin Doyle Jones. Michael is the author of several books on local investing, including Put Your Money Where Your Life Is and Local Dollars, Local Cents. Kevin Doyle Jones is the co-founder of SoCap Global, Impact Hub, and Neighborhood Economics. Before we get started today, I'm excited. We're going to hear from Derek Peoples, Cincinnati Diversified Community Investment Fund. But I wanted to spend a few minutes here as our very first episode asking Kevin and Michael to just share a little bit about why it is you guys wanted to put this information together and to create this content for the public. Michael, I'll start with you, or Kevin. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to launch in. Here's the deal. There's a lot of movement out there around local investment and around crowdfunding, but I think it's quickly going to hit a ceiling. And the ceiling is that it requires a lot of time, effort, and in some cases money for people to do local investing. And this is why we need funds who will do that work for individual investors. Funds that can do the selection, the management, the diversification of portfolios, and just make it easier for people to invest in their community. But then we get to another problem. There's 10,000 funds, give or take, in the US, and if you ask how many of those funds allow grassroots investors to participate and focus on local businesses or projects, we're talking about 3 dozen. We think that number should be greatly expanded, and it is expanding. And this, I think the purpose of what we're doing here is really to bring to broader attention what's going on coast to coast and how people can replicate it.
That was great.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd love to hear the same from you.
Yeah, I am really excited, as Michael is, that it's becoming easier and easier to invest in the place you live, the place you hope your grandchildren will move back to. You could have an intergenerational connection to a place because it's a good place and you've invested to make it a good place, including investing in local businesses, because money from in a local business circulates 8 times. Money in a big box is gone, within an instant. So you're building up your local tax base, the funding of your schools by investing locally. And I look at the funds who are bringing capital to folks who've been dealt out of the game a whole lot. Neighborhood economics focuses to a certain extent on the neighborhoods where people die 10 years younger, and your zip code is a greater determiner of your wealth and mortality and health than your DNA code. So, and so we work with the catalytic funders who work in those zip codes, faith-based funders, catalytic foundations who are learning to do a place-based initiative. A whole lot of foundations in our space, interestingly, are moving from a sector approach where I'm in Houston. I was talking to this is a foundation that's coming to our conference, and he had like $5 million to go out every year, and so it meant that affordable housing was a sector, and they did 2 houses, and he said they're stopping that, and all their money is going to a certain zip code. So if it goes to a certain zip code, you're not burdened with the categorical need to define the boundaries of your theory of change. So it's really breaking a siloed thinking to a place-based thinking. And there's a whole lot of foundations that are doing that in San Antonio. They want to, and more of them are doing it. So you can fund you can listen and fund the problems that are needed if you don't have a thing that says I only do housing and I only do education. And so these foundations are breaking out from sort of a linear mindset. And so we're helping them think locally. And then because they want to, with all these new funds, it is possible to invest and have people invest alongside them in these zip codes with this giving to invest vehicle that is going to be a really big tool. So investing in disinvested neighborhoods is easier, and I want to focus on that. But I'm really a fan of where Michael goes on the overall basis that we're investing in our local economy, and that's good for everybody. So we wanted to do it together. So I would be on one edge and he would be on the other edge. Probably not edge is the word, but we had a spectrum. I didn't need him to be different. He didn't seem to ask me to be, that much different. So anyway, there we are.
Yeah, what I'm really excited about is that there are all of these opportunities around the country where you can put your money not just into Wall Street, but where you can actually put your money into your main street. And as you're saying, Kevin, into every main street, not just the main streets that have been traditionally invested in, but even the ones that have been divested in
Right,
from capital.
exactly.
And so what
We have lost our host.
We have lost our host.
Well,
okay. Well,
that's interesting.
So we were saying why we were interested in this thing, and we may have
There you
we
go.
may have Joel back.
And those watching this, just be aware this is our first rodeo with
Right.
this show, and there are necessarily glitches.
So Derek, we represent, in a certain sense, Michael and I do different kinds of iconic customers. If he could represent, I invest in Cincinnati, and I would have the folks who say, I invest in the disinvested neighborhoods. How can those stories unite in what you're doing?
Well, sure. I mean, and you bring up a good point, which is the story, because that's really, I think the starting point is we really have to change the conversation and we have to change the narrative around how we invest in our communities, but also in our local economies. And I think, the pandemic taught us that the local economy is extremely important to our way of life, but also to our well being in our community as well. And we got to experience that during the pandemic. And so, in the work that, in the conversations that we've had in Cincinnati, and we've involved different sectors, including the faith-based sector. But in our conversations, what we have realized is that we are living in an era where traditional economic practices and frameworks are being challenged. And there is a need for us to reimagine what investing in a local economy looks like. And so in Cincinnati, we've thrown around terms like economics of compassion,
Right.
which you have been a part of, Kevin, which years ago really started to emerge as a viable alternative to catalyzing community well-being and prosperity. And the concept really just recognizes that our current economic system is really limited in its ability to address the needs of society and the environment, but also we seek to shift mindsets towards what really shifted mindsets towards a more holistic understanding of value. And so that's what we've explored in Cincinnati that have kind of led us to creating organization called the Common Good Alliance. And within the Common Good Alliance, we're going to be creating a unique financial product that allows for communities to share ownership in the development of their neighborhoods. And that product is called a Diversified Community Investment Fund.
Wow, that's great and really exciting to hear.
So I think for purposes of people watching this and maybe a little unfamiliar with the alphabet soup of funds that are out there, maybe say a little bit about what a DCIF is. And
Right.
if you have slides, you're welcome to show them. If you just want to walk us through orally, that's fine too.
Sure. Well, I think it actually, I could share a slide or two. And let's see, are you all able to see my screen?
Not so far.
Okay.
We hear your keystrokes though, so we know something is happening.
Right. Oh,
There we
there
go.
is something.
We see a hallway of
Oh
mirrors.
gosh.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
This
Let me
is
stop sharing that.
Where did
Well,
all of me go?
well, I could just, it's easy just to talk about it briefly, but,
Okay, great.
the product that I mentioned was the Diversified Community Investment Fund. And essentially, what that allows is it allows for community capital to come into a community and a neighborhood. And it comes in a way where everyone can participate in the wealth building and the local investing, regardless of your economic status. And that's something that's really unique because although we know that there may be people in marginalized communities that don't have the money to invest, but it still doesn't mean that they can't have shared ownership of how their community is developed and that they don't have ownership of the community character that's developed within the ecosystem. And so, however, it does offer an opportunity to invest regardless of your economic status. And so, projects that serve the community, that serves the community's needs, can get the type of capital that they need, like
So,
equity or
do you
revenue.
have a social currency then that people are investing if they don't have cash?
Sure. Well, one of the areas around a diversified community investment fund is that for it to really operate as it was designed, you really have to focus on community governance. And so that's the space where the community actually has ownership, because when you deploy capital out of the fund, it has to be in align with what the community is representing and what they actually need and want.
And
So
but is that in every DCIF, or is that in the way you're doing it and adding that cultural front end, which is great? You know, the community guided capital is better. Obviously, they know what's wrong.
exactly. And
But
that's
do all DCIFs have that, or is that just you?
I I'm not actually sure because I think we're one of only six
Right.
communities around the nation that's piloting this DCIF out. But but there is flexibility within the fund that allows you to be creative about how you approach different aspects of it. So it's not actual community currency, if you will.
Right. Okay.
So I think it's useful to maybe just, pause here for a second and to explain kind of just the legal architecture of this.
Good idea.
So, s- one of the things that we deal with in the creation of funds is a fundamental law that the federal government passed in 1940 called the Investment Company Act. And to comply with this act, uh, in every bit of its detail is exceedingly difficult and expensive. But the Act lays out a bunch of exemptions, and several years ago, a group of us did a handbook on these funds and identified a bunch of exemptions. And a lot of what we'll talk about in this series are the kinds of exemptions that are there. Now, one exemption we didn't really explore in that handbook because it did not exist yet was the structure of a DCIF. And one way of thinking about it is that it's creating a local real estate company, and that company has ownership stakes, significant ownership stakes, and management involvement in a bunch of real estate projects. And that's 60% or more of that entity's capital. And the rest of the capital can go into local business or other things in the community. So that structure, which Brian Becken of Cutting Edge Capital recently rebranded as something else, I forget the name. Yes, that is the big framework here. And as you said, Derek, it doesn't exist yet. But you and 5 other communities are now really trying to work it through and implement it. So it's a grand experiment.
Right. David Palmer from Washington D.C. is bringing. He will be at the conference as well, and he's got one of the DCIF, and he's got a large property development, affordable housing, community centers and stuff, and he's layering this into an existing project with a more community connected form of capital. I think is just it gives an existing project a lot of added oomph in good ways. He thinks so. Probably people are using it in different situations.
Well, and also the amount of momentum and energy that we've been able to build around this concept of a DCIF is really gone a lot further than we expected. And so we started out by focusing on land acquisition because, when you talk to Black leaders in Cincinnati, a lot of them feel that the only way to really generate generational Black wealth is through the acquisition of land. And building those local investing or that local economic ecosystem where the flow of the dollar can circulate within a community.
Right.
And that's really the approach that we're taking. And we've had success to this point to where we've been able to work with Cincinnati's land bank, housed under the Port Authority. We've been able to acquire site control for 3 different properties that we'll be able to leverage this fund to develop alongside, public funds and things like that. But we were really surprised as we started talking about, this concept and the people that really came to the table, such as the biggest developer in Cincinnati, that feels that this product and that this common good alliance could really be leveraged to fulfill their social mission.
Wow.
And so a lot of the reason why we were able to obtain site control was because of the partnerships that really came to the table around this
Right.
concept of allowing community capital to come in.
Right.
Yeah.
So many places around the neighborhood economics ecosystem, I just have to say, you find an anchor who opens the door to a much bigger world than you would have thought. In your case, it's the real estate developer. Sometimes it's a hospital, sometimes it's a university. Yeah, an anchor is the way to grow faster.
Right. Yes. And Kevin, like you said, the story behind what we're trying to do really helped us obtain site control as well.
Right.
And
they got to believe you're credible. They see your partners. They say, okay, well, marketing. The only reason for marketing is to make the sale easier. And that's the partners are in the category of marketing in a certain way. I mean, they also are really helpful, but they validate you.
Right. And real estate developers, they're in the business of real estate. and so there's the conversation there. But I mean, when you really look at bringing the partnerships together, developers don't want to always be seen as gentrifiers,
Right.
And so this model of being able to allow for community investment alongside accredited investment is
Right.
really, I think, the game
Oh,
changer.
interesting.
So, Derek, I think it would be interesting for you to maybe talk about the 3 properties, where they are, what their history is, and what your vision is for what you want to do with them.
Great idea. Great
Yes,
question.
and I actually have a slide of a map of Cincinnati that has highlighted, color coded where the communities were actually focused on. But I don't want to create that echo chamber again, but essentially, there's three communities that we're working in Cincinnati. So the Evanston neighborhood, which is a historic Black neighborhood in Cincinnati, and it's described itself and branded itself as the educating community because in Evanston you have one of the top universities in the region going alongside with one of the highest rated high schools in the country. And so all of that is in this historic Black community of Evanston. And right now, you know, over the years, I would say the building of I-75 Expressway really tore through the main corridor of the Evanston Business District.
Hmm.
And again, it took a lot of those dollars out of that community because once the highway started coming through,
Right.
it started leaking that circulation of the dollar,
Right.
which any community needs a local tax base to survive. And so looking at how we really design neighborhoods, Evanston was really kind of a low hanging fruit for us because of the great capacity and the great potential. You know, one of the things I do want to state and why Evanston comes into play is that as we are communicating with the community and as we're communicating with the Port Authority, we've had to do some negotiation around what type of development would be needed in that community, whereas the Port Authority was looking at a full market rate development project, and the community of Evanston actually wants a mixed income type of project. And so we're in the middle of negotiating that with the Cincinnati Port Authority. But the community, and actually that's the model that would work best for this fund, is to have a mixed income development property. So we've been successful at that. The other community in Cincinnati is Bond Hill neighborhood, which is another historic Black community where there's a high rate of Black home ownership. And so we were able to acquire a piece of vacant land there that we would be developing as well. And then downtown in the West End is where we're looking at our other property, old school building that we would then be looking to, convert into some type of mixed use development.
So all of these projects are going to be mixed use, you think?
Yes, that's right.
And the first one, though, the one that's the highest priority is going to be the one in Evanston.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Uh, so I've got a few other questions I'm curious about. So and some of these questions I kind of know the answer because full disclosure, Derek and I are working together on this project. But I think it's useful to share with a broader audience some of your thinking about this. And one of the really challenging things about doing a project like this is building an audience that's A, interested in what you're doing, and B, preparing them to convert their interest into an investment at some point or another. So I'm, what are you doing to build the interest? And you've been involved in Cincinnati for a very long time, so it's not you have not parachuted in. This is your home, but how have you been building out this list of interest?
Sure. Well, again, it goes back to our story, right? And our story and what we have determined through years of conversations and different types of projects through the economics of compassion is that we now realize that the traditional layers of the economy does not benefit society in mass, and it's kind of one of the the haves and the have-nots, and our story really is a continuation of this concept of the economics of compassion. And so the ideas of where, again, and where this came about, and the major theme that we have been, having our discussions around are the themes of the Black Wall Street. And we all heard about the story of Black Wall Street. If you know anything about the Tulsa riots and the Greenwood community in Tulsa, where back in the early 1900s, you had a very high percentage of Black people that were doing very well, and they had created their own local economy. A lot of that was due to segregation, of course, but they were forced, in a sense, to create their own local economy, and they were successful at that. And this community consisted of business owners. It consisted of doctors, lawyers, and everything that a local economy could need. They had in Greenwood, and we all know what happened with the Tulsa riots that destroyed that local economy. But the thing that we don't talk about enough are during that time how many times the flow of the dollar circulated within that community. And when you compare that today, obviously, it's in the Black community, the flow of the circulation of the dollar is much less. And I don't have direct numbers on this, but I would suggest and put my money that the flow of the dollar does not circulate through a Black community longer than a day. And back in this time of Black Wall Street, the flow of the dollar transferred over 80 times before it left that community. But you really can't support a local economy if you don't create conditions for the Black dollar to circulate. And that's the story that's been drawing interest in this work. And so, we've based our desires for investments in several different areas, which includes, like I spoke earlier, the acquisition of land, but also looking at investing in arts and culture, preserving and celebrating the rich history and the contributions that Black artists have made to Cincinnati. Looking at different models for housing, such as renters equity, dividend housing, renting partnerships. And these are all models for renters to be able to earn equity in the place that they live. Not everybody can own a home. Not everybody wants to own a home, but it doesn't mean that, again, when you're looking at shared ownership and when you're looking at developing neighborhoods in a conscious way, allowing for the community to be able to earn equity in the developments is really key to this. And so, our other pillars is really focusing on, again, business enterprise with this fund. It kind of operates like a real estate trust. So we have to invest 60% of our funds into real estate, but the other 40% could be invested into businesses and other things as well. But the real key pillar is finding creative ways to organize and stack capital. And this DCIF is really the vehicle to allow us to do that.
So that's really important, the stack. And who do you see as kind of the critical layers of that stack? I mean, I imagine local foundations, maybe the Port Authority, maybe the city government. So who's stepped up, and who do you think should or will step up?
Well, I can say that the community that has really stepped up into this concept of generating Black wealth here in Cincinnati has been the Jewish community. They've been behind us lock and step in this process, and that's very, very unique and interesting. Because improving Jewish-Black relations has always been a desire in Cincinnati, and that's something that we did through economics of compassion, but also other, it was a multi-faith initiative. And Common Good Alliance, in a sense, is also a multi-faith initiative. So yes, you have your institutional investors, your corporate sponsors, you have your foundations, but the real key that I think to any community is to really access and build relationships with the faith-based community. You have to think for the Black community, as I was growing up, in the stories that I heard, was that in the Black community, the most precious asset in any Black community was the local church, because it wasn't only a place where you can go and worship, but it was a place where you can gather. And right now, and Kevin, you taught me this, over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to have thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of churches that are going to be closing, which is going to leave vacant land open. And then if you look at these private companies that are coming in and buying up all of this land, we don't want that to happen. But as these churches start to close down, the land would create a huge cash windfall for these faith-based communities, and having them involved in this effort to utilize land in a more local, economic, sustainable way, they need to be involved in this as well. Churches are the biggest landowners in Cincinnati. Kevin, you're muted if you're talking.
So while Kevin is trying to figure out how to unmute himself, let me just suggest that people in the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will be happy to engage with them.
Yeah, and I'm going
Joel,
try
I
to
don't know
Kevin
how to
on my end
unmute
too,
myself.
But while we're doing
Now
that,
you're good.
I did have a.
Oh, am I? Okay, great.
There we go.
So really quickly, I want to say there is this fund that you will really be interested in at Neighborhood Economics. And it uses church land to build houses for workforce development for folks who can't work where they live. The church keeps the asset, but you don't solve ownership and workforce housing together. You can solve it with the near zero cost base of church land. It can be a huge thing to solve workforce housing, so your teachers have a place to live, and there's several of those happening, and it's a pretty cool, interesting thing. It preserves a worship space, it gives them an ongoing asset, and it makes their church into a community space while solving workforce housing. So anyway, I think it's
very interesting.
Yeah, you'll find it really interesting. It fits in with your project.
Yeah, for instance, here in Cincinnati, we have the Episcopal Retirement Services. That's actually one of the bigger developers in the city. They do primarily senior housing, but I suggest definitely focusing in on your faith-based communities in your because that's that's a real huge asset that often goes overlooked,
Right.
and they have generally have a mission to do good in a community.
Right. Well, the great thing about an endowed church, as opposed to going to institutional faith-based money, is that the endowed church just has a local board, and you often just need to change the mind of one uptight asshole who can't think beyond Thanksgiving charity, and then they will go for 4% to 5% return loans,
Or
but
less.
yeah, or less, exactly, or less. Yeah, it's often just a little bit of board schmoozing. Send another old white guy with them and go get them drinking and get them to think about things differently.
Well, so yes, I mean, and so Michael, to your question, I think that's really what's been unique for us is the support from interfaith communities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about, I'm curious also about local government, because has local government been supportive, and in what ways, and do you think you can nudge them further?
Yes, well, we actually got into the mayor's office very early in our process, and so the city is pretty aware of the concept behind what we're doing. And we had a conversation with the mayor of Cincinnati early last year where he saw opportunities to leverage the Common Good Alliance to also help facilitate and build an ecosystem of Black developers in
Mm.
Cincinnati and building a pipeline of Black developers because we're working, and that's the other unique thing with our partnerships is that we're working with the biggest developer in Cincinnati, but we're also working with a Black architecture firm, and we're working with a Black developer who's also was very instrumental in helping us get site control. And this particular, you know, development consultant that we're working with, I'll throw out his name. His name is Robert Sanders, but he's also a former artist. And one of the
Mm.
things that he said in our conversation that really kind of blew me away is he said that when you're really looking at designing a neighborhood and when you're really looking at developing a neighborhood, it's the same as developing a record
Hmm.
for a music record. And that really, again, that's very powerful because the one true treasure of any Black neighborhood is its character, is its community character, and that's something that is always lost when you have new development and
Right.
gentrification. You lose that community character and that rich history, and our efforts is to really maintain that, and so that's why one of our major investment pillars outside of real estate is really going to be in arts and culture as well, and really looking at the design of these spaces. The development that we're looking at in Evanston, we're going to be looking at 30 to 60 residential units, but we're going to have about 10,000 square feet of commercial space, and bringing in artists to help design that space and help build that space out is also very key to investing in business enterprise, investing in individual artists.
What's the link between investing in an individual artist and in a business that will grow and do what the fund needs?
Well, when you're invested in artists, you're primarily invested in project related activities
Ah,
that
okay,
have a
got it.
return.
Okay,
So that could be as simple as investing in a festival or investing in art exhibits or anything like that that has some type of return back to the community, or is some type of project that produces economic impact by bringing
sure.
people into the neighborhood, of course.
Yeah. Wow, interesting. Okay, got it. New way
So
to think about it. Yeah.
a lot of people will look at that through PRIs, program related investments, but I think that's an area that's often overlooked too. That, I mean, for every dollar invested into the arts, you actually get back $8 of economic impact. So,
Wow.
very important.
Derek, how can people get involved with what you're doing if there's interest?
Sure. Well, we're very much interested in creating a knowledge sharing platform where we can really bring communities together and where we can co-learn from each other and be able to share about our progress and the unique creative approaches that we're taking, because the way this DCIF is designed really allows for some creativity,
Yeah.
which is good.
And so is that going to be both virtual and physical? Are you going to set up some kind of peer learning thing with corridors like yours or whatever?
Virtual and physical. I mean, we
Yeah.
do want to build a local investing network that's national in scope. Or I say that kind of doesn't make sense. A local investing network that's national in scope, but we basically just want to also build a network of impact investors. And then we also want to create that knowledge sharing platform. So, as we're having success, we can bring awareness to how this can be replicated in other communities.
Well, so I need to point out that this live TV show will be on the database at Impact Alpha in a few days, and along with the transcript. and then your listing of your fund in their database for their outbound distribution. And they've just launched their local funds database today in time with us. They're really great folks. So, if people want to look, we can also work with them on ways to contact you through that database, and we can do some other things. We at Neighborhood Economics are building a wiki on the funds that are in the database that we work with. You're the first fund, but then they're evolving from Atlanta as the next time. So anyway, we want to tell your story. We have multiple ways that have distribution in multiple venues that will overlap in good ways. Michael reaches 8,000 people. They reach tens of thousands at Impact Alpha, and we reach about 3,000. And then Joel has a reach for the personal stories in the podcast. So, and then it'll be searchable. And obviously, we want to start applying analytics to those funds.
And the analytics would be helpful to us too. But
let's talk about that offline.
Sure, but we're also you and Michael, you all know the players in Cincinnati, and I think it's also probably about time to bring neighborhood economics back to Cincinnati as well.
It could be, yeah. We're going to be in Asheville in September here, and then the MacArthur Foundation and other folks want us to come to Chicago in May of 25. So they're good folks to work with. So anyway, but we're open to we're going to keep the show rolling. Jeremiah's 30 years younger than I am, so he's taken over a lot of that stuff.
Great.
No, he's 40 years young. 35 years younger than I am, I think. It's crazy how much younger he is. Anyway. Okay. Sorry. Throw that aside.
Yeah. Well, if there's no other questions from you guys right now, I just wanted to, for everyone out there listening, let you know, kind of just reemphasize what Kevin just said, is that the whole purpose of this is to make it easy and simpler for someone who wants to invest in their local community or in a local community in the country to do that. And so this show is a piece of that, but there's going to be a lot more information housed in these databases that you can find at Impact Alpha, you can find at the Main Street Journal, and then you'll be able to find the archive of all of these recordings and shows on my website at mindfulmarketplaceshow.com. And so one thing that I am very impressed with and excited by the diversified community investment funds is that a lot of times local impact investing has been reserved for people who already have some wealth, who are already accredited investors. And what I'm super excited about is being able to harness the power of the community itself to be able to do this economic development work through allowing ordinary folks who just are trying to save for their retirement to be able to do so in their own community and in their own Main Street rather than having to rely on Wall Street for it. And so that's Derek. I guess that's the only question that I really had here before we go out is like, how do you see that piece of it, the crowdfunding, the community investment piece of this? Where are you guys at, and how has that been developing?
Sure. So we have developed a partnership with a crowdfunding platform that's regulated in the state of Ohio. And so that was one of the biggest hurdles we had to get over, was finding a regulated platform. And we was able to do that locally through a partnership. And so we'll be able to we'll be able to set up the infrastructure to allow for that community investing, and so that was a major kind of hurdle that we had to jump over. But there's another piece another piece of the answer to your question, is that we really do have to convince and educate people of lower means of the power of their economic, of the power of their dollar. Because if you really think about it, as you said, Joel, impact investing has been more or less kind of targeting people with already considerable wealth. But we're all impact investors. I mean, that's one thing that the pandemic taught us, was it gave us a little bit of more awareness of where we spend our dollars. And I think that that's really important. And so for your average neighborhood resident that's, just trying to make consistent payments into their retirement, having a vehicle like this and being able to participate in mixed use development where property values can actually rise in a sustainable manner that would allow for the generation of wealth. And looking at bringing in renters that could also earn equity through some of these renting partnership models. There are really, when you really dig deep into it, impact investing means a lot of things. And at the end of the day, we all think about where we're spending our money. And with that, if you're thinking about that on a regular basis, to me, you're an impact investor.
Right.
One of the things I'll just leave you all with this is that when you look at a community of 5,000 residents or 5,000 families with an average household income of 20,000 a year, that statistic alone would tell us that that neighborhood is probably poor, and there would be other deficient data that would probably complement that. But when you look at the other side of it, 5,000 families in a community with an average household income of 20,000 a year, that's $100 million a year that community has as spending power. If 99.5% of those dollars are leaving the community as soon as it comes in, that's really where the problem is.
That's
Yeah, I
really
mean,
interesting.
I've long thought that the way to understand community distress and poverty is not the absence of income or wealth, it's the absence of a multiplier effect.
There you go.
And getting people to respend and reinvest is a critical piece of that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really well said by both of you.
Well, thank everybody for your time here today. Thanks to Derek Peebles from the Cincinnati Diversified Community Investment Fund for joining us on our very first live stream episode of Community Capital Live. We are excited to see how this grows and how this improves. I know we've had some technical issues on our first run here, but we are going to be every first and third Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And then you can find the archive of these on mindfulmarketplaceshow.com as well as the Mindful Marketplace Show YouTube channel. And as we mentioned before, you can access all of the necessary data on these funds at the databases that are being created on Impact Alpha and on the Main Street Journal, which are going live in the next day or two here. So,
and Joel doesn't always play peekaboo with the camera the way he did today. That's unusual. But I think he had some video game going and just got distracted.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. It definitely wasn't me panicking, trying to make sure everything was working okay. That's definitely not what it was.
No. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
We enjoyed it. I hope people are watching or will or whatever. Thanks, Derek. See you next week. See you all next week. Okay.
All right.
San Antonio.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.